From WBRN Radio and on the Bostonred Network. Numbers Man, popularly now known as the Numbers Man Show. It is on the 14th of January 2020. This is old Numbers Man, as we are called here, in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. There's much economic information coming out this week, and some came out last week. We had the job situation for December. It is reported. And we'll also look at the activities in various states as far as how the economy is doing there in this report. Now, we made an editorial decision that we'll cover the trade deal, which will be signed on Wednesday at the White House, the same day that the articles of impeachment are transmitted to the Senate. There are two articles there that accuse DJ Trump, president, of obstruction of justice as one, and using his office to personal benefit. On the political side, Bostonred, we've done a series of programs on it as it progressed in the House of Representatives. Now the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, will be on Wednesday transmitting the articles. They literally call it transmitting, where they walk it to the Senate after it is voted on in the House. And the managers there in the Senate, or prosecutors, whatever you want to call them, will prosecute it. And the leader of the Senate, McConnell of Kentucky, has said that it will officially kick off, I suppose that's a term we can use, on Tuesday of next week, where they'll set the parameters of the rules, and they will go from there. And then I'm assuming that once those formalities are over, the Senate Pro Tem, which is Senator Grassley, he's a senior member of Iowa, and then the Chief Justice Roberts will swear in the Senate. And once that is, the senators, I should say, once that is done, they sit collectively as a jury of 100. Providing everyone is there. But nonetheless, that will be what it will be. And decisions are made by 60 votes there. And to impeach President Trump, it would take 68 votes. And what the economy does about that, we haven't seen much activity on that front. But back to the other story of the week, the tariff regime with China. In it, and we'll on the next This Week in Economics we'll talk about that in much more specifics. Basically, China has agreed in over a 2-year period to buy $2 billion of product, and some of that, most of it will probably be agricultural products, and also to adjust their intellectual property laws, where I suppose firms will not be at least in the technical sector, to let the Chinese inspect their source code. But we'll have to get through those perimeters. Many economists have all said already that as far as the tariffs are concerned, it will not make a substantial difference, because although some will come off, many will remain, up to 25% in some instances. And of course, those charges are not paid by China, but by manufacturers here that basically are buying components, etc. So that will not necessarily go out, and he's leaving. The President Trump is leaving tariffs on some things. So that'll be that regime there, and we'll see how the fallout goes with the economists and what they think of it. We at this mic have not attributed much in the global sphere to China, because a lot of it was pro forma. A lot of it was, of course, a slowdown in China, so they were buying less. They found alternative markets. what they will do about the markets they have, i.e. in places like Brazil and various other for pork supplies, how they will work that. One is not certain. Perhaps in some of those markets they'll buy a little less there and more from the American farmer. But the American farmer lost probably 33%. They interviewed a woman I was listening to in the upper Midwest of their revenue, and of course various other things, lower prices for some commodities. We're talking pretty much about soybeans here, and of course there are other products also out there, but soybeans, and in the pork sector, China had a variant of the swine flu, so therefore large quantities of pigs were knocked out. Thus, we have a situation there where they had to make that up. So they would be buying a lot of pork bellies anyway, so we don't really have to look there. That is one situation. As far as Brexit, it's been out of the news, off the page, period. The situation in the Mideast, particularly in Iran and Iraq, has quote-unquote settled down to some normality. The energy sector has not moved up in the last few days, pretty much sticking around $60-something per barrel. We'll touch upon that before we are finished here. One other note is our numbers or statistics that we give are hardened statistics at the time that we give them. They really don't fluctuate. So sometimes the date of the actual publication of our episode is a day or so later, but it will not matter there. But this week we also expect the Beige book to come out, and that will be another source. So we'll put that into a broadcast. The China-U.S. trade deal, the Beige book, and I believe we have some production numbers also there. Will be in the next broadcast in a few days. And we'll go now to the employment situation for December. That was released on last Friday, about 3 or 4 days ago, something like that. We don't know what, the 14th now. Anyway, the employment situation there, 145 jobs created in December. The ADP organization had estimated more jobs. There's a little difference in the rate. The rate of redundancy or unemployment, 3.5%, did not change. Job gains we would expect to occur in retail trade. Of course, we had layoffs at manufacturing, loss, I believe, roughly about 12,000 jobs, and in healthcare. Let's get to some of that. This news release presents statistics from 2 monthly surveys, a household survey, which focuses labor-focused status, including unemployment, by demographic characteristics, and then, of course, the establishment as measures non-farm employment hours and earnings by industry. Revision of seasonally adjusted household survey data has been revised using updated seasonally adjusted factors, a procedure done at the end of each calendar year. Seasonally adjusted estimates back to January of 2015 was subject to revisions. The unemployment rate for January of 2019 through November 2019 as originally published and revised. We'll see that in a paper here. But anyway, nonetheless, in December the unemployment rate was at 3.5%. The number of unemployed persons was unchanged at 5.8 million. A year earlier, the job rate was 3.9. The number of unemployed persons was 6.3 million people. Amongst major groups, the unemployment rate for adult men 3.1%, adult women 3.2%, teenagers at 12.6%, for Europeans at 3.2%, African Americans fall here at 5.9%, Asians at 2.5%, and Latinos at 4.2%. Showed little change. The long-term unemployed, those jobless for more than 27 weeks, as some people see 20 weeks, 26 weeks. Anyway, nonetheless, at 1.2 million was unchanged in December. accounting for 20.5% of the unemployed. The labor participation rate was unchanged at 63.2 in December. The employment population ratio at 61 for the fourth consecutive month, but was up 0.4 percentage points over the year. The number of persons employed part-time for economic reasons at 4.1 million, a little change, but was down by 507,000 over the year, individuals who would have preferred full-time employment. In December, 1.2 million people were marginally attached to the workforce. That is down 310,000 from a year earlier, and that data is not seasonally adjusted. Individuals were not in the labor force, 1 and 2 weren't available for work. Amongst the marginally attached, 277,000 discouraged workers in December, down by 98,000 from a year earlier, and that was not seasonally adjusted either. The remaining 968,000 persons marginally attached to the labor force in December had not searched for work. The Establishment Survey. Non-farm payroll employment was increased by 145,000 in December. Notable job gains occurred, as we previously announced, in retail and health care. Payroll employment rose by 2.1 million, down from a gain of 2.7 million in 2018. In December, retail trade added 41,000 jobs, which it normally does during that particular time. Employment increased in clothing, accessory stores, 33,000 there, in building material and garden supplies, 7,000. Both industries showed employment declines in the prior month. Employment in retail changed little, or net in both 2019-18 plus 9,000 and plus 14,000 respectively. Employment in healthcare is something that critics said would disappear with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. It increased by 28,000 in December. Ambulatory care services and hospitals added jobs over the month, 23,000 and 9,000 respectively. Healthcare added 399,000 jobs in 2019 compared with 350,000 in 2018. So there were more jobs added in healthcare than in the last 2 years, and we have seen out there. And let's move on here. Leisure and hospitality continue to trend up, 44,000 plus. The industry added 388,000 jobs in 2019, similar to the increases in 2018. There were 359,000 jobs. Mining declined by 8,000 in December. In 2019, employment in mining declined by 24,000 after rising 63,000 in 2018. Construction was a little change in December. That is usually normal winter month. 20,000. Employment in the industry rose by 151,000 in 2019. About half of the gains, 307,000 in 2018. Employment in professional and business services showed little change. 10,000 there. The industry added 397,000 jobs in 2019, down from an increase of over 561,000 in 2018. Transportation and warehousing, little change. They were a negative 10,000. Employment in the industry increased by 57,000 in 2019. About 1/4 of the gain, 216,000 in 2018. Manufacturing, little change, a negative 12,000 jobs. Employment in the industry changed little, a plus 46,000 after increasing 264,000 in 2018. You can see where that is going. Employment, a little change in wholesale trade, information, financial activities, and government. The average hourly earning for all workers rose 3 cents to $28.32. Over the past 12 months, the average earnings have increased at 2.9%. In December, the average earnings of private sector production workers at $23.79 with a little change, added 2 cents there. the average work week for all workers on private, and they still use non-farm. We won't get into that because that's a leftover from Depression era. Was unchanged at 34.3 hours in December. In manufacturing, the average work week in overtime remained at 40.5, in other words, 5/10 an hour there, and 3.2 hours respectively. The average work week for production and non-supervisory workers held at 33.5. Excuse me. The change in total non-farm payroll for October was revised down. That's not unusual. In Q4 by 4,000, from 156,000 to 152,000. The change for February was revised down by 10,000, from 266,000 to 256,000. Within these revisions, employment gains in October and November combined were 14,000 lower than previously reported. Monthly revisions resulted from additional reports received from businesses since the last publication, and in other words, after revision, job gains averaged 184,000 over the 3-month period. The next report will be out in January. Released on February the 7th. That would be after the Iowa caucuses. So some additional notes here. Really would not get into much. Beginning in January, this month, occupation estimates in table will reflect the introduction of the 2018 Census Occupational Classification System in the Household Survey, and some things going on here at the beginning with data in 2020 January. Married persons will include those of opposite and same-sex marriage. Prior to 2020, those estimates included only those in opposite sex marriages. So some things that are changing here as they modernize the data. Hopefully they'll drop the word farm. Let's see, upcoming revisions to the establishment survey in January, and on February 7th, the establishment survey will revise non-farm employment hours and earning data to reflect the annual benchmark process and update seasonal factors there. So we'll see some things happening here. But we have to look at what else are we looking at? They show the unemployment rate for January of 2019 through November 2019 as first published, and there'll be some revisions there, and we'll keep you up to date on those revisions. Seasonal adjusted unemployment rates in 2019 changed due to revisions, and we look at it. We go back to January. It was at first published. It was 4%, and then it was revised at 4% also. We go to February, 3.8%, and revised at 3.8%. We won't get all these in. In July, it was 3.7%, and revised at 3.7%. In September, 3.5%, and revised there. So there was no change, and it's still 3.5%. In October, 3.6%. So we started the year out, the American nation, at 4%. And now it is down to 3.5%. That's 0.5% less there. So that's basically where we are. And if we look at the population here in 2018, December, 258,888 was the non-institutional population. Civilian workforce was at 163,111, and that is in hundreds of thousands. In thousands. Sorry about that. Participation rate was 63 there, and we ended December at 63.2, and the total non-institutional population, civilian non-institutional population, at 260,000 and 164,000 labor force. And those employed in December of 2018, 156,325, and it ended up 158,000 there. And let's see what else we have here. Well, we won't get into that. Well, men over 20 years and older, 166,000. Civilian workforce at 83,000, and the participation rate at 71.5 thousand. That's the prime years for working for women. That participation rate at 58.8 thousand there, and employed and who was not employed. So kind of that was 2018. So we go this year. The women have at 59.2, and then so we look at 72,000. So again, some of these numbers here they are seasonally adjusted. From age groups here, 16 to 19, that would 595. In other words, that's 5 million there, and the participation rate at 35. That's 16 to 18. I hope I gave those right. And that total workforce at 5 million there. Let me just go back up and make sure that we got everybody straight here. Yeah, that would be at 258 million. Let me get this in millions here. Sorry. And in December it'd be 260 million, and that would be the non-institutional population. And the participation rate, we gave that, and those employed 156 million in December of 2018, and with 158 million in December. So there's millions there. I hit my decimal point right there. Anyway, make sure we get everything here. The household survey here, again, this is the participation rate. We just give the present participation rate hadn't changed. Anyway, the civilian workforce here as 164 million, and then they changed that was 209,000 there. So anyway, that's not durations. Give durations here. Well, at 30. No, excuse me. At 206. Some of the breakdown here with these various groups. We look at employment by industries here over a month. Change in goods producing operations here at 52, and we look at various industries here in terms of manufacturing. Manufacturing has been very hard hit here, and not much you can do. Durable goods, negative 5.1, and it ended up a negative 1 here. So really not a lot. Women and production and so forth and so on. I think we now it's roughly, and this has been reported in 2018 it was 49.7, and now it's roughly at 50% where women stand as workers. And in a total private women workers at 48.6, and total private production supervisory types, production and non-supervisory types 82.4 and 82.2. So that's sort of a breakout of the numbers. The household survey establishment survey both produce sample-based estimates of employment, and both have strengths and limitations. Over and over the month for employment change, about 100,000 statistically significant in the establishment survey, while the threshold for statistically significant change in the household survey is about 500,000. In other words, 500,000. However, the household survey has a more expansive scope than the establishment survey because it includes the self-employed. I think we've come up with that before. Those businesses are unincorporated, unpaid family workers, ag workers, and private household workers who are excluded by the establishment survey. So I'll look a little bit at that. As for undocumented immigrants counted in the survey, it is likely both surveys include some undocumented immigrants, and no doubt about that. Does the establishment survey sample include small farms? About 40% of the establishment survey is comprised of small business establishments with fewer than 20 workers. So that would probably get some small farms in there. Some questions that you would have. Anyway, we'll leave that and we shall move on here to domestic gross domestic product by states. That's the third quarter 2017. That was released on Friday, also January the 10th. Gross domestic product (GDP) increased in 49 states in the District of Columbia in Q3. The percentage change in real GDP in the third quarter ranged from 4% in Texas to 0% in Delaware. So we look at some of these states. Here we can look at Washington State, for instance, 3.1, Oregon 1.8, California 2.1, Nevada 2.3, Arizona 2.4, Utah 3.2, one of the higher ones out there, and Idaho 2.5, Montana 2.3, and Wyoming only 1.3. Colorado, let's see, what are they doing? 2.6. New Mexico also at 2.6. Nebraska and Nebraska's at 2.3. Kansas at 2.2. A petroleum producing state, Oklahoma at 1.9. North Dakota, a lot of fracking going on there, but only 1.1. South Dakota 1.8. Minnesota at 2. Iowa at 1.3. Missouri at 2.4. Arkansas, a little surprised there, they were 2.9, as was Louisiana. Texas again at 4. Indiana at 2.3. Michigan 1.3, very low there, same as Wyoming and Wisconsin. Those are some of the states. 1.5 there. Kentucky also 1.5. Ohio 1.7. Mississippi 1.9, 1.7, Alabama, Georgia 2.3, Florida 2.4, South Carolina at 2, and also North Carolina. District of Columbia was at 1.4, Maryland at 1, Delaware no change at all, Jersey at 2.3, hope we're leaving West Virginia at 0.5. Virtually no growth at all. Pennsylvania at 2.1 and New York at 0.5. Vermont at 1.8. New Hampshire at 2.2. Maine at 2.1. Maine is usually the lowest in New England. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts at 2.2. So the average was incidentally 2.1 growth rates here in there. Non-durable good manufacturing increased at 10% in the nation, and combined growth and contributed growth in all 50 states. The industry was leading contributor to growth in Texas, the fastest growing state. Retail trade increased at 8.2 for the nation and contributed in all 50 states. District of Columbia. Professional, scientific, and technical services increased at 5.6 in the nation, contributed to growth, and District of Columbia. In contrast, finance, insurance decreased by 5.3 for the nation, subtracted growth from all 50 states. District of Columbia, the industry was the leading contributor to slow growth in New York and Delaware, the slowest growing states. So that's where we'll look at the beige book and see where we are there in terms of when the Federal Reserve banks out here report in. And if we're going back to 2008, in the U.S. was at 2.9. That was the average gross domestic product. For New England, it was 2.2. And this year, we have third quarter 2.1 and 2.1 for New England. In the Midwest, and it's interesting who they put in the Midwest, Delaware, District of Columbia, oh boy, 1.8 in 2008, 1.2 in Q3 there, and that was the Mid-East, I'm sorry, why did I call it Midwest? Anyway, the Great Lakes, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Their average was 2.2 in 2008. They ended up in Q3 at 1.6. That was the Mid-East, Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, District of Columbia, and Delaware. They are 1.2. Not great there. The Plain States, Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, they were at 2.3 in 2018. And this time around, they ended up at 2. Not bad. But those states, some were down. The Southeast has Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. They were at 2.6 in 2018. Now they're at 2.1. Not bad, given the situation of the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. They were at 3.9 because Arizona was at 4.1. Texas was at 4. They did a lot of growth there. That was in 2018. And they were at 3.5 this time around. Not as robust. The Rocky Mountains, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado, they were at 3.3 last year in 2018. They are at 2.7 this time around. Not as much growth. The Far West, they were at 4.3. That was their average. Alaska, California, Hawaii, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington State. The Washington State was at 5.8. That was last year. So they have changed a bit there. The average this time is 2.2. Yeah, 4/10. Oregon at 1.8. That was the lowest one there. And California 2.4. A little bit better than the average there. Washington State at 3.1 was in a pretty good shape, actually. So that's basically how the states rank up here, contribute to percentage percentage change in gross domestic product there. And if you look at it, the U.S. 2.1, and various industries here. We won't go into these. I don't know if we'll append these or not. Perhaps we shall. Take a little break here. WBRN Radio. Hold on. Okay, we're back. Nonetheless, BlackRock, before I forget here, the chair, Mr. Fine, I believe was his name. Anyway, is now in, and that is an organization has $7 trillion globally under their administration. They are now specializing on climate activity, and they will rid their portfolio of offenders of climate. And that's not unusual. The former head of UK Central Bank, Mr. Carney, who used to be at the Canadian Bank, is now working on climate change. So in other words, in all the models, now the climate factor will be there, whether it be insurance companies, it'll be fossil companies or whatever. What is their exposure to the climate? And that will be figured in, period. And again, that will reshape much of what is being done because of the pressure by BlackRock. It is a very large company, no doubt about that, and they have a lot of influence. So in other words, shorthand on the political side, climate deniers are on their way out because BlackRock has determined, and many others, that climate is factored in, and that is one of the things that we'll be looking at more and more out here, and that will be one of many things that various predictors will be offering there and where they are going with it. So again, BlackRock has revised it. At one time they were not climate sensitive, but Greta Thunberg has succeeded in convincing these businesses the direction that they should be going forward in. Climate's very important. At Crescent Analytics, we have always figured in climate for the last few years on these so-called disasters, hurricanes, etc., out there, and where they will tend to go. We've looked at it and will continue to look at it in the future, and where it affects many, many things. So this is the big moment, I would say, that these equity companies are now coming in, and as they come in, that sets the particular bearer up there. Just looking at CNBC here, the Fed could cut interest rates 3 times this year. That's UBS prediction. That would be folly. The problem with cutting interest rates is that yes, businesses like cutting interest rates, but if you cut interest rates to just 0, if there is a financial crisis, you have nowhere to go, period. And that is the big problem right there. Incidentally, the U.S. deficit is over $1 trillion for the first time in 7 years. So evidently this administration is not a deficit hawk, period. And with manufacturing being in a recession, and this was a week that jobless claims fell. Actually, that was the second week, January the 9th. So you're starting to see a little bit of movement in the economy. U.S. consumer confidence, of course, dipped. We reported on that earlier. And you'll start to see more and more of that. Retail sales in November, just 0.2%. You start seeing more in that. I was looking at some figures from the Target Corporation. Their December was not as robust as they had predicted. You're going to see a lot of revisions in Q4 as we get the story out more and more. We'll start to see those revisions in the basic economy. All things are not as rosy as one would have predicted one time, period. Incidentally, the new agreement between the U.S. and China is no longer labeled a currency manipulator. That was a political situation to begin with. One other note here while I'm looking at CNBC, and this is the BBC, sorry about that. Microsoft ended their Windows 7 support on, I believe it was the 14th of, just recently for Windows 7. So if you have Windows 7, well, you look out a little bit there and see where things are going. Garlic farmers are evidently in a very good shape. Incidentally, they love the Trump administration and all these tariffs and what have you. They've been doing better than other agricultural approach. Let me just take a quick look at Reuters here so we see what we can get from Reuters as we wind down our broadcast here. They're also reporting the climate manipulation angle here. Well, we don't want to over-report it. And from the UK, the PM there, Johnson, suggested if Howie is knocked out of the UK, what are the alternatives? So there we go. The optimal thing, 5G. China is ahead in 5G. There's no doubt about that, period. One thing we've not seen show up in the news is the impeachment and also the presidential election, where it is right now. We'll see that later. We're just now getting to the Iowa caucuses. We have a long ways to go there to see what is going on here. And let's look at our latest numbers here now. This is on the 14th. These numbers here, what was the FTSE? The FTSE 100 Oops. The FTSE 100, the change there was 7.92. In Amsterdam, they were 0.76. In France, a negative 12.18. The DAC in Frankfurt, negative 5.60. They've been mixed the last few days, and the Eurostas, a negative 9.42. In Madrid, they were at 37 point. And let's fly along here in Bombay, 92.94. That was a change there. And Hang Seng was at negative 69.8. The Nikkei was at 174.60. And in New York, and they've been around this, it's been mixed the whole week, but they finally went to 9273.93. So they made 9,000 at 95.07. That was oops, sorry about that. That was the Nikkei. The Dow Jones at 28,907. They've since made it, I believe, to 29,000. Anyway, it was 83.62. That's been all week. They've been around that. And the S&P 500 at 22.78. So, we got that out of the way. And let's take a look at Petro here. And it's pretty much Brent crude futures at $64.54. It was up 34 cents. And West Texas crude at $58.31. It was up 23 cents. T.B. Pickens' ancestors, a family, are still jumping for joy there. And gold at $1,550. It was up $1.55. Let's go futures on the Forex, depending on which one you look at here. And that is our latest financial numbers. Basically being mixed the whole week here that we get into. We'll have a more complete wrap-up on our next report as we look at the beige books. Let me just one over the little story here. Cap on this: homelessness in Los Angeles. Proposal. This is a proposal by the Trump administration to help homelessness there. They had Ben Carlson there, prepared to offer LA an array of resources, including emergency healthcare services, federal land. That was in the letter that they sent out. That's the federal government. Carlson also suggested in a letter that the government expects changes in LA, how to manage the homeless population to address the humanitarian crisis. The governor in California is also working on that. And the federal funds earmarked for LA often come with stipulations, some favor demands to alter policing policies to clear more encampments. And that's the whole situation. In California, people can camp out if there are not any places to literally go. In September, federal officials visited Los Angeles, and they got about 60,000 people in encampments, vehicles, shelters. That's been a long time coming. This crisis didn't come over night. So, offering supplemental emergency aid, health care, shelter, transitional housing. What are they talking about anyway? From Low-Income Housing Coalition said such programs typically mean that shelters require homeless people to accept services, including drug rehabilitation, as a condition for getting an emergency bed. So in other words, it could run contrary to what they are doing now, and the over-influence of religion in the process. Let's and also the idea of federal housing vouchers. Would they include new vouchers or existing period? And so this is until said here. Interview last week is an LA supervisor, Mark Ridley Thomas, called it a high-risk situation here, that there will be any activity at all. So in other words, the state isn't waiting for response. The request for help sent there. His tweeting, "We are doing something." The governor said we have a real plan. They should have had a real plan 10 years ago. But that does play into the economy in Los Angeles. You have people that could be productive in the economy that are not productive in the economy. You have a potential here to not only improve the general health of the city of Los Angeles, to help people out. So we thought we'd spotlight homelessness as we normally do on this particular situation. Nonetheless, this is a Numbers Man in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on the 14th of January 2020. Get the year right here, and for those in business, make it a productive week. And for the consumer, obviously the eye is on the prize there. Good day.